you have $2,500,000 saved for retirement. Standard advice says you can safely withdraw $100,000 a year and never touch the principal. But that number is missing two things, and either one of them can cut your real spending by 30% or more. The first is what happens if the market drops the year you actually stop working. The second is what Social Security really pays a high earner, not what a quick calculator on some website tells you it pays. Most comparisons treat $2,500,000 versus $5 million as if the only thing that changes is the size of your withdrawal check. Bigger balance, bigger check, done. It isn't that simple, and treating it that way is how someone ends up with a plan that looks fine on paper and feels tight the moment they actually retire. A $2,500,000 balance and a $5 million balance can produce two very different retirements, or two surprisingly similar ones, depending on choices most people never think to make until it's too late to undo them. In this video, we're going to compare $2,500,000 and $5 million, the way it actually plays out in someone's life. Not just the withdrawal math, but the real cost of working 3 to 5 more years to move from one number to the other, and the Social Security benefit you're probably overestimating right now without realizing it. Let's start with the trap that most retirement calculators skip past, because it's the one that does the most damage in the first few years after the paycheck stops. If you're sitting on $2,500,000 and going back and forth on whether to keep working or retire now, this is built for you. Subscribe, because the exact math that helps you make that call is coming up next. At $2,500,000, a 4% withdrawal gives you $100,000 a year. That's the number most retirement plans get built around. Now watch what happens if the market drops 20% in your very first year of retirement. That $100,000 you withdraw still comes out, except now it's coming out of a portfolio worth $2 million, not $2,500,000. You're still taking the same dollar amount, but it's a much bigger bite out of what's actually left. I've watched this happen to people who did everything right for 30 years and never once ran the numbers on a bad first year. This matters because a withdrawal rate isn't really about the percentage on paper. It's about the order the returns show up in. Two retirees can earn the exact same average return over 20 years and end up in completely different places, because one of them hit a bad market in year one and the other didn't. Money pulled out during a downturn can't grow back, because it's not sitting in the account anymore to recover. That's sequence of returns risk, and it doesn't show up in the simple math most people use to decide when to retire. A 2026 analysis of retirees holding a $2 million nest egg found that once you factor in inflation, taxes, and Medicare premiums, the real annual spending power came out closer to $42,000, not the $80,000 the 4% rule would suggest on paper. Less than half. That's not even a crash story. That's what inflation, healthcare costs, and taxes do to a withdrawal number in an ordinary year. This isn't about scaring you off a plan you've spent decades building. It's about protecting the retirement you've actually earned. The people who get hurt by this aren't the ones with too little money. They're the ones who never stress-tested the plan against a bad first few years. Run that same bad first year forward another 5 years, and the gap doesn't close, it widens. A portfolio that starts smaller after a downturn has less left over to grow when the market finally does recover, so the early hit keeps costing you, long after the headlines have moved on to something else. But this is the part that actually changes the comparison between $2,500,000 and $5 million. It isn't that more money buys a bigger check. It's that more money buys more room to absorb a bad sequence without changing how you live. And that brings us to something almost nobody puts a number on: the real cost of the extra years it takes to go from $2,500,000 to $5 million. Picture a couple, both 62, sitting on $2,500,000 combined between their 401ks and other accounts. They're facing the exact decision a lot of people in their late 50s and early 60s face: retire now or keep working another 5 years to reach $5 million. One of them wants to travel while they still feel good doing it. The other is worried about running out of money at 85. Both concerns are reasonable. Neither one is wrong. That's what makes this decision harder than a spreadsheet can capture. The 5-year path comes down to math. Most people never actually run themselves. At a 5% real return, $2,500,000 takes roughly 14 years to double on its own. Add in serious ongoing savings, somewhere around $100,000 to $150,000 a year, between a couple's combined 401k contributions and other savings, and that same couple can realistically move from $2,500,000 to $5 million in about 5 to 6 years, not 14. So the extra years aren't just extra years of income. They roughly double the portfolio, because savings and growth are compounding together at the same time. That sounds like an easy call in favor of working longer. It isn't once you price in what those years actually cost. I used to think more money was always the safer choice. Then I watched 2 people retire within a few years of each other. One left at 62 with $2,500,000 and spent the next several years visiting family and places he'd put off for decades. The other stayed until 67 to hit $5 million and had a serious health scare not long after he finally stopped working. That changed how I think about what enough actually means. Retiring at 62 with $2,500,000 might mean living on somewhere around $80,000 to $90,000 a year after taxes, with 25 or more years of good health to spend it in. Working to 67 for $5 million might push that number up to $160,000 a year or more, with 5 fewer of the years your body cooperates the most. The extra $2,500,000 buys a bigger number on a statement. It doesn't automatically buy a better retirement. That depends on what 5 specific years are worth to you. And that isn't a question a calculator can answer. There's another factor that tilts this even further, and it's one high earners tend to get wrong without ever finding out. It's what Social Security actually pays you compared to what you assume it pays you. Social Security only counts income up to a cap each year, no matter how much you actually earned. In 2026, that cap is $184,500. Anything you made above that amount in any given year simply doesn't count toward your benefit. If you've been earning well above the cap for most of your career, your benefit isn't based on your real income. It's based on a capped version of it. Then there's the part almost nobody accounts for. Social Security calculates your benefit using your highest 35 years of earnings, and if you have any gap years, an early retirement, a career break, years at a lower salary, those get averaged in too, sometimes as zeros. 5 years of zero earnings mixed into that 35-year average can pull your monthly benefit down noticeably, even if the other 30 years were maxed out. A doctor or an executive who worked 33 strong years and then took 2 years off before claiming can end up with a smaller check than a colleague who earned less overall, but worked every single one of those 35 years. In real numbers, that looks like this. Someone who earned at or above the cap for their entire career and waits until full retirement age in 2026 gets a maximum benefit of about $4,152 a month. Claim at 62 instead, and that same benefit drops to somewhere around 70% of that, closer to $2,900 a month. That's a difference of over $1,000 a month, every month for the rest of your life, based entirely on when you file. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just how the formula works. But if you're planning your retirement around the maximum possible benefit, and you're also planning to claim early, you could be short by $10,000 to $15,000 a year compared to what you assumed you'd have. So now there are two forces working against the simple version of the $2,500,000 versus $5 million comparison. A market drop in the wrong year and a Social Security check smaller than the number most people carry around in their head. How do you actually protect yourself against both? It starts with how you handle a bad year, not with how much you've saved. In 2008, a retiree sitting on $2,500,000 and withdrawing $100,000 a year watched their portfolio fall to around $1,500,000 by early 2009. The market eventually recovered, and by 2013 the account had climbed back some. But the withdrawals kept coming out during the drop, at the worst possible time, and that damage never fully reversed. That retiree ended up cutting spending by close to 30% for years, not because they ran out of money, but because they'd pulled money out while the account was down and it never had the chance to recover on that portion. That isn't a rare, once-in-a-lifetime story. It's what sequence of returns risk actually looks like when it happens to a real person instead of a spreadsheet. Run the same stress test today. A 20% drop in year one of retirement, followed by a modest 3% a year for the next 5 years. Someone withdrawing a fixed $100,000 a year, no matter what the market does, ends up with roughly $1,600,000 after 5 years, down from $2,500,000. Someone using a flexible approach, cutting withdrawals by around 10% after a bad year, and only raising them again after a good one, stays above $2 million over that same stretch. That gap isn't luck. Both people faced the identical market. The difference is entirely in whether the withdrawal plan could bend without breaking. This matters more the smaller your number is, because a $2,500,000 portfolio has less room to absorb a bad sequence than a $5 million one does. But even at $5 million, the same mistake compounds the same way. It just starts from a higher floor. Someone at $5 million who gets hit with the same 20% drop still loses $1 million on paper. And if they're withdrawing a fixed amount through that stretch, they're doing the exact same damage to their account, just with more room before it becomes a real problem. This is exactly why current retirement research keeps landing on the same recommendation: hold 2 to 3 years of spending in cash or short-term treasuries specifically, so you're never forced to sell stocks during a downturn. It isn't about predicting the next crash. It's about not needing to sell into one. The difference between those two outcomes isn't the market. It's a system, and it comes down to 3 specific things you can put in place, regardless of whether you're sitting on $2,500,000 or $5 million. There are 3 specific moves that protect you against both the sequence of returns problem and the Social Security shortfall, and none of them require guessing where the market goes next. The first is a cash cushion. Hold somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000 in short-term treasuries, or a high-yield savings option enough to cover 2 to 3 years of spending. When the market drops, you draw from that cushion instead of selling stocks at a loss. It doesn't need to earn much. Its entire job is to buy you time until prices recover, so a bad year in the market doesn't turn into a permanent cut in your income. The second is using the years between retiring and 73, when required minimum distributions start, to convert some traditional 401k or IRA money into a Roth account. In 2026, you can convert up to the top of the 12% tax bracket, which is $50,400 for a single filer and $100,800 for a married couple filing jointly, and pay a relatively low rate on that conversion now. Done consistently over several years, this can shrink the required distributions you'll eventually be forced to take, which can lower Medicare premium surcharges and reduce how much of your Social Security ends up taxed later. The third is switching from a fixed withdrawal number to a flexible one. If your portfolio drops more than around 20% from where you started, cut that year's withdrawal by about 10%. If it climbs more than 20% above where you started, raise your withdrawal by a similar amount. This is the same guardrail approach from the stress test earlier, the one that kept a portfolio above $2 million, while the fixed withdrawal version fell to $1,600,000. These three moves work together, not separately. The cash cushion buys you time, the Roth conversions lower your future tax bill, and the flexible withdrawal plan keeps you from locking in losses during a bad stretch. Skip one, and the other two have to work harder to make up for it. None of them require picking better investments or timing the market. They just require setting up the plan before you need it, not after a bad year has already happened. Here's the part most people miss when they skip these moves. Without them, a $2,500,000 portfolio can end up feeling like $1,500,000 once taxes, health care costs, and a bad sequence all hit at once. With them, that same $2,500,000 can outperform a poorly managed $5 million. The gap between a good plan and a great one isn't a few dollars. It's commonly $20,000 to $30,000 a year in real spending power, year after year. If you're working through this decision yourself, subscribe, because the specific age where working longer stops being worth it is different for every household. And that's worth understanding before committing to 5 more years at a desk. If you've done everything you were supposed to do for 30 years, maxed out a 401k, avoided debt, and you're now staring down required minimum distributions, Medicare surcharges, and a Social Security benefit smaller than you expected, it's completely normal to feel like the system rewards everyone except the people who saved the most. I don't know every detail of your situation. I don't know your exact numbers, your health, or what your family looks like. But I've seen enough of these situations to know that the biggest risk to most people's retirement isn't the market. It's freezing up out of frustration and not making any decision at all, and then looking back 5 years later at a plan that never got adjusted for a life that kept changing. The system isn't rigged against you. It's complicated, and complicated is what makes good savers feel punished for saving well. A Roth conversion, a cash cushion, a flexible withdrawal plan, none of that is a loophole. They're tools available to anyone willing to learn how the rules actually work. And using them is no different than reading the fine print on a mortgage or an insurance policy instead of assuming the worst. So bring it back to where we started. What actually separates $2,500,000 from $5 million was never really the number on the statement. It's how much margin for error that number gives you. And with the right plan behind it, $2,500,000 can produce a steadier, richer retirement than $5 million managed without one. In short, a fixed withdrawal rate quietly ignores both a bad sequence of returns and a Social Security benefit that's usually smaller than people assume, especially for high earners. Working 3 to 5 more years to go from $2,500,000 to $5 million isn't free. It costs you some of the healthiest years you have left, and no amount of extra savings buys those specific years back once they're gone. And the fix isn't complicated. A cash cushion, smart Roth conversions before required distributions start, and a withdrawal plan flexible enough to bend during a bad year instead of breaking. Neither $2,500,000 nor $5 million is automatically the right answer. What matters is whether the number you retire with, whichever one it is, comes with a plan built to survive a bad year, not just a good one. If you're weighing retiring now against working a few more years, subscribe, because working out your own personal break-even point between time and money is exactly what we're covering next. Your retirement was never really about hitting a specific number. It's about having enough margin to actually live the life you spent decades working toward. Plan for that, not just for the balance on the statement.